Today we'll be discussing Alexander the Great and his contributions to Western society and culture. Alexander's father was Philip II from Macedon, and this is actually the guy that helps to take over the Greeks and to start building the empire of the Macedonians. As you can see on the map, here's Macedonia and there's Thebes down below, and this is where Philip was kept in captivity for some time. Here's what's left of King Philip's palace. As you can see, Philip was very inspired by what he saw in Greece and by his time that he spent there, and he decided to build up his military and get ready for a big invasion of Greece. Once again, here's a demonstration of the phalanx in action. Notice all the groups of soldiers with their spears. We saw this previously when we discussed the Spartans. And this is their style of fighting at the time. It's kind of like one big long wall of spears coming at you. And as they get in close, the soldiers tend to use their short swords. And this is the type of strategy that these guys will use, Philip and then later Alexander, when they conquer these new territories. As you can see, Philip had 3 goals. 1, build a strong army. 2, unify the Greek city-states. And 3, defeat Persia. One of the things that happens with Philip is that he's not very popular with the Greeks. Many of them like him, they view him as a savior, but many of them also think that he's a threat. And here's a map of Philip's empire. In the darker shade of purple, you can see where his original empire was, and by 336, the areas that he had conquered. So notice it's quite a big distance. Eventually, Philip is at his daughter's wedding, where an old bodyguard comes up to speak with him and greet him. And at that moment, he pulls out a dagger and assassinates Philip II. So at that point, Alexander the Great takes over at age 20 after his father's assassination. All right, here's a picture of Philip II as he looks today. Here's his skeleton on display at a museum in Thessaloniki. Here's some historical views of Alexander the Great. And here's the Hollywood version of Alexander the Great. Alexander was someone who was raised to take over and to start continuing his father's empire when he became the new king. He was provided with the best education and military training at the time. And notice his teacher was Aristotle. So it's Aristotle who was trained by Plato. And remember, Plato was trained by Socrates. Here's some of the character traits that made Alexander popular with both his men and with the aristocracy, the nobles. Notice that he's the kind of leader that's going to lead from the front of his army, and he's going to get right in the thick of battle with the soldiers, so they're willing to go to fight and give their lives a lot of times for him. He rewards them for their service with medals and with pay. And he also is able to speak very well. As we said before, he's well educated, especially being taught by Aristotle. One of the things about Alexander the Great is that he's very good at building an empire, but he never does get a chance to lead the empire as a full-fledged king. He's so busy out conquering new territories for most of his time. And we could see that he eventually decides he's going to build the biggest empire on the face of the earth. Here's a map of all the lands that he conquered. Notice he is declared the pharaoh in Egypt. He does defeat the Persians and takes that giant empire as well, and expands all the way into India. Alexander was never defeated in battle. That's what I think was one of the most interesting things about him. He makes the largest empire ever created by a single man. He will later be an inspiration for people like Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and others in the 20th century especially, such as Hitler. He spreads the Greek culture to all regions and areas of the world, of the known world at his time, and he does create a new culture. And he does all this by the age of 32. In 334 BC, he leads troops into Anatolia, which is in what we call Turkey today. And at the Battle of Issus, he's able to defeat Darius III, who ends up actually turning around and running away from the field at the time. Darius offers a peace treaty, but Alexander does not take it. In 332, he marched into Egypt and proclaimed himself the Pharaoh and a god. He later entered Mesopotamia and once again faced Darius at the Battle of Galgalma, and Darius once again ran away. And by 327 BC, Alexander the Great reaches the Indus Valley. He's able to take over all of Persia, but he wants more still, so he pushes further into India, and it takes him 4 years to get to the Indus Valley. The troops get tired of being out on away from home for so long, and many of them are kind of at this point refusing to go any further. Here's some of the examples of the soldiers that made up part of his army. Alexander moves his troops back across the 3,000 miles towards Babylon, and when he reaches the city, a banquet is thrown in his honor. He gets ill that evening, and he's dead by morning at the age of 32. At this point, he had no sons that his empire could be awarded to. They were too young at this point, and his top generals are the ones who end up taking over. His final words are when they ask him who should take over as the new emperor, and he says, "Let the strongest take it." There's a theory out there that Alexander was potentially poisoned, and it's been tossed around since the day of his death till now. There has been no evidence especially leading towards that. We still don't know where Alexander's tomb is at this point either. It's one of those mysteries of history. The accepted view of his death is that he most likely died from malaria or some kind of other disease like this. So possibly one of the strongest military leaders in history could have been brought down by a mosquito, which is kind of weird to think. If you want to remember, a quick way to remember his achievements, if you spell out Alexander, Anatolia Peninsula, left for Egypt, excited to take over Persia, and moved east to the Indus River. If you take a look at the map, you can see the areas that were split up of his empire after his death. Most likely, we said, as he did die from malaria, but it is not conclusive at this point. General Ptolemy takes over Egypt, and later from his lineage will be the famous Pharaoh Cleopatra, the seventh. Antigonus is the one that takes the Anatolia Peninsula, and Seleucus takes Persia to India. Here's another diagram showing the breakup of his empire. As you can see, this division leads to a weakness at this point. Over the next few hundred years, between these areas, there's rivalries between the different kings that rise up that are descendants of the generals. And this is going to leave them perfectly weak for the Romans to come in and then conquer them. As you can tell from this map, Alexander thought quite a lot of himself. As you can see, these are only a few of the places that he named it Alexandria. Whenever he would set up a Greek city-state like this, he would bring in actual people from the Greek areas to live in these places and set them up as actual Greek towns and basically make them outposts of Greek culture and society in parts of Asia and North Africa. As a result, the Greek language spreads, and this new blend of culture called Hellenization, which is a mixture of Egyptian, Persian, Indian, and of course Greek culture, get mixed together and spread throughout this area. Right, here is the mixture of the different cultures. You can see that one of the things that Alexander did to try and promote this Hellenization, or this mixture of the cultures, was he took a Persian wife. He ended up having 3 wives during his life. Polygamy was practiced at this point by a lot of these kings. And he did adopt many of the Persian customs himself. He encouraged his soldiers to also marry Persian women and to do the same things that he was doing to imitate him. Right, here's the economy of the Hellenistic era. Some of the different products from the different places. Probably the best example of all of the Alexandrias that Alexander the Great founded was Alexandria in Egypt. And this was built by him in northern Egypt. Was also the location of one of the greatest libraries of the world at the time. Also featured one of the wonders of the ancient world, the lighthouse of Alexandria. Right, as we know, Alexandria was a Greek city-state in the middle of Egypt. It's known for its great library, its museum, and its broad avenues lined with Greek statues. was also known for its giant lighthouse, its zoo, and botanical gardens. Here's some artifacts from Alexandria, Egypt, and notice the statues are now underwater in a lot of times too. Notice the Greek style in the statues. Right, here's some examples of hieroglyphics. Here's a statue of Ibis, one of the Egyptian gods. As you can see, the Hellenistic age comes to an end once the Romans are able to take over and conquer most of their known world at the time, which includes Alexander's empire. So all these areas end up becoming outposts of the Romans' empire as time goes on.